What if the most mysterious interstellar object we've ever seen just revealed something no one expected? Because the Keck telescope in Hawaii has captured brand new images of 3I Atlas, and what scientists found left them stunned. The data shows something no ordinary comet should have: a strange anti-tail, powerful nickel and cyanide emissions, and patterns that challenge everything we thought we knew about these cosmic visitors. In this video, we'll reveal the new images and the story behind them, the evidence, the reactions, and the one question every astronomer is now asking: what exactly is 3I Atlas doing out there? Before we begin, feel free to let us know in the comments what time it is for you and where you're listening from. We love staying connected with our community. Now, it's time to close your eyes. Let's begin. It began with a pulse no one saw coming. A faint flash buried in Keck Observatory's data from late August 2025. So weak, most systems flagged it as background noise. But then came a second pulse, then a third, each identical, each stronger, all coming from one source, 3I Atlas. At first, astronomers dismissed it, just another icy fragment passing through the solar system. But as the Keck 2 spectrograph locked in, something impossible appeared in the readout. Nickel and cyanide, two elements that should never appear together in deep space, were flaring in perfect symmetry, stretching both toward and away from the sunday. Why would an interstellar object emit industrial-grade chemistry in geometric precision? Dr. Avi Loeb's team recalibrated every instrument, expecting a glitch, but the signal refused to vanish. The nickel spiked near the core, while cyanide spread outward in mirrored bands, forming a pattern that didn't obey gravity or solar wind. Even stranger, there was no dust tail at all. No scattering, no natural reflection. Only a metallic glow cutting through the void like a silent engine. If sunlight isn't powering the glow, what is? By dawn, over Mauna Kea, cross-checks confirmed the impossible chemistry. It wasn't random, it was structured. Across observatories, scientists stared at identical spectra and felt the same chill. Nature doesn't build symmetry that perfect. If the readings are real, then 3I Atlas isn't behaving like a comet, it's behaving like a creation. But when researchers traced the shape of its emissions, they found something even stranger: asterisk, asterisk, an anti-tail bending toward the sun instead of away. What kind of force could make light and matter flow in reverse? The moment the images from Keck went public, everything changed. What astronomers saw wasn't a tail drifting away from the sun, it was bending toward it. The light itself seemed reversed, as if gravity had been rewritten. No natural comet in recorded history had ever behaved this way. A comet's tail should always point away from the sun, driven by solar wind and radiation pressure. But 3I Atlas wasn't obeying that law. Its tail was inverted, an anti-tail, glowing green and blue, defying the direction of light. In the control room, technicians rechecked the imaging filters. Dust calibration? Wrong. Sensor reflection? Impossible. Every test confirmed the same result. The anti-tail wasn't an illusion. It was real, structured, and stable, an engineered alignment that seemed to ignore the sun's push entirely. What kind of object could bend particles toward the very star that should be repelling them? When the spectral maps were overlaid, something even stranger appeared. The cyanide emissions were perfectly layered across the tail's length, evenly spaced like coded intervals. Nickel signatures pulsed at precise distances, almost rhythmic, like a timing sequence. Was this chemistry communicating? Across observatories in Hawaii, Chile, and Spain, the same realization spread in whispers. This wasn't just a reflection pattern, it looked like propulsion. The symmetry, the alignment, the precision, all of it, suggested a process far more deliberate than solar wind. If this is an interstellar fragment, one researcher wrote, then it's behaving like it knows exactly where it's going. The glow intensified with every rotation. Instead of fading as it neared the sun, 3I Atlas grew brighter. Cyanide gas should disintegrate under that heat, yet its spectrum held steady, even strengthened. Nickel shouldn't remain vaporized at those distances, yet it did, locked in perfect ratios that refused to break down. Whatever was powering that reaction wasn't sunlight. It was something internal. Astronomers began comparing the movement to past interstellar visitors, Oumuamua, Borisov, but none matched. Those objects followed predictable escape trajectories. 3I Atlas, however, appeared to be adjusting course, not drifting, not tumbling, steering. Could it be using solar gravity as a slingshot, not to escape, but to align itself? That possibility chilled everyone watching the telemetry feeds. Because if 3I Atlas was self-correcting, that meant it wasn't simply reacting to physics, it was responding to it. And if something can respond to a star's pull instead of surrendering to it, then we're not looking at a passive traveler. We're looking at control. The data forced a question no one wanted to say out loud. Who or what would need to fly this close to the sun? Because the next readings didn't just confirm movement. They revealed a pulse inside the object itself, a heartbeat of metal and light. And when the world's most powerful telescopes focused in to measure that pulse, they discovered something that made every scientist stop breathing the spectral fingerprint of refined nickel, forged in ways nature has never known. It started with a flash too precise to be random. A spectral spike on the Keck Observatory's log at 3:47 a.m., a narrow beam of nickel emission, pulsing every 6.4 seconds, steady as a clock. No comet had ever done this. No natural object could. The data streamed across networks in real time, showing perfect repetition, perfect rhythm. Whatever was happening inside 3I Atlas wasn't chaos, it was coordination. At first, researchers thought they were seeing reflected sunlight bouncing off spinning surfaces. But as the analysis deepened, the pattern refused to match any rotation model. The nickel lines were too clean, too refined, identical to the kind of alloy signatures produced in industrial furnaces. Natural nickel in space is always mixed with iron, a messy fingerprint of stellar debris. But 3I Atlas showed none of it. Pure nickel, no iron, no impurities. It was like someone had scraped the signature of a foundry across the stars. How does a frozen body light up with the chemical signature of smelted metal? Theories fractured overnight. Some argued it was an anomaly of the Keck's sensors. Others whispered it was something more, a hint that the object wasn't just reflecting light, but generating it through some controlled reaction. If cyanide was its breath, nickel was its heartbeat. In the weeks that followed, more data came in. The Hubble Space Telescope confirmed faint spikes in the same frequency bands, matching the Keck readings exactly. The same pulse, the same impossible purity. Something inside 3I Atlas was heating and cooling in perfect cycles, as if following an unseen command. At Harvard, Dr. Avi Loeb's team compared the patterns to known astrophysical sources, pulsars, rotating asteroids, binary systems. None fit. The frequencies were far too stable. Every natural phenomenon drifts, wobbles, decays. But this pulse didn't. It was locked, deliberate, controlled. Loeb called it the most precise signal ever observed from a non-artificial source, and then paused. Because if it wasn't artificial, what was it? Could this be a natural process we've never seen, or evidence of design? The nickel spectrum wasn't just pure, it was structured. Peaks appeared at harmonic intervals, like musical notes layered over one another. Energy rising and falling in measured patterns, as if the object were speaking in chemistry instead of sound. Even stranger, when the pulse was run through frequency analysis software, the ratios matched known mathematical constants, pi, e, the golden mean numbers that shouldn't exist in cosmic noise. What kind of natural process encodes mathematics into metal? Around the world, data centers replayed the signal again and again, each time discovering subtler details. A modulation that seemed to vary as 3I Atlas rotated, a shimmer that grew stronger whenever it aligned with the Sunday, as if it was feeding on radiation, as if it was alive. If it's feeding, then what is it preparing for? By early September, Keck's extended exposure captured something new. Faint arcs forming along the object's perimeter, like curved filaments glinting through the gas. They weren't random outgassing trails. They were evenly spaced, symmetrical, a lattice. Was this the surface of a machine, not a comet? When the data reached NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, analysts noted another anomaly. The intensity of the nickel glow was fluctuating in sync with changes in the sun's magnetic field. No natural comet could react that fast. It was as if the object was listening. For years, astronomers have searched for signs of artificial behavior among interstellar visitors, hints of propulsion, controlled motion, non-random emissions. But nothing had ever fit. Until now. 3I Atlas wasn't shouting across the void. It was humming, quietly, methodically, in metal tones that seemed almost deliberate. And the longer it hummed, the closer it drew to Mars. The debate inside the scientific community turned volatile. Was it technology, a natural crystal resonance, a thermal anomaly no one yet understood? There were too many possibilities, and yet only one that matched the evidence. When matter behaves like a message, you have to ask who or what is sending it. The data didn't stop there. Late-night measurements revealed something terrifyingly precise. The pulse rate was increasing, not drifting randomly, but accelerating according to a predictable mathematical curve. Whatever was happening inside 3I Atlas was building momentum. If it were simply melting, the light curve would flatten. If it were burning off material, the emissions would scatter. But here, every oscillation grew sharper, every wave cleaner. It was stabilizing, as if preparing for something. Could 3I Atlas be charging itself, powering up for the next phase of its journey? In the silence of the control rooms, the numbers kept rising, rhythmic, flawless, unstoppable. And when the pulse finally peaked, the telescopes recorded a sudden surge of cyanide gas erupting from the surface, perfectly timed with the nickel glow. The two emissions combined, forming a luminous shell around the object that no one could explain. If this was activation, then the question wasn't what 3I Atlas was anymore. It was what it was becoming. Because just days after the pulse stabilized, the glow changed color, and scientists realized that what looked like cyanide wasn't just a chemical reaction. It was something breathing. The color changed before anyone could explain it. What had been a cold blue shimmer around 3I Atlas began to deepen first into green, then into a strange, luminous haze that pulsed like breath. Keck's spectrograph recorded the shift across multiple wavelengths. Cyanide molecules flaring in a steady rhythm, expanding and contracting in perfect time with the object's nickel pulse. It looked alive. At first, the reaction was disbelief. Cyanide gas shouldn't behave this way. It should disperse instantly, torn apart by sunlight and solar wind. Instead, the cyanide was organizing, clustering into symmetrical waves that wrapped around the object like a living membrane. Astronomers called it a respiratory pattern. Others called it impossible. Every data stream confirmed the same sequence. Cyanide emission. Pause. Nickel spike. Then silence. The pattern repeated every 7 minutes, like breathing in chemical code. Why would a frozen interstellar body produce such a deliberate rhythm? In the following days, the glow intensified. Instruments detected faint temperature fluctuations, synchronized with each gas burst, heating, cooling, stabilizing. It wasn't random venting. It was regulation. Whatever was happening inside 3I Atlas, it was controlling its environment. At Harvard, Loeb's team ran simulations of cyanide-based reactions under vacuum conditions. Nothing fit. The behavior didn't match cometary outgassing or chemical decay. It's as if the molecule knows what it's doing, one researcher wrote. Like it's responding. Responding to what? Cyanide isn't just toxic, it's reactive. On Earth, it forms the backbone of prebiotic chemistry, the foundation of amino acids and life itself. So why would an interstellar visitor be exhaling life's first ingredient into space? NASA's spectroscopic database confirmed the readings independently. CN radicals, carbon-nitrogen bonds, forming and breaking in controlled intervals. Yet the energy output was too stable for spontaneous chemistry. It was directed, guided. The reaction peaks occurred only when 3I Atlas aligned with solar magnetic flux lines, as if it were interacting with the sunday. Was it harvesting energy or sending it back? Then came the discovery that pushed the theory past reason. As the cyanide emissions thickened, they began reflecting ultraviolet light in patterns never before seen in astronomy. Looped spirals, symmetrical arcs, like fingerprints burned into vacuum. When mapped in 3D, the structure resembled a lattice, a fractal shell expanding outward. It wasn't chaotic gas, it was design. If the object were artificial, the chemistry made sense. Cyanide can store and transfer electrons efficiently. Combined with nickel, it forms electrochemical bridges. Could 3I Atlas be using chemical reactions as energy transfer breathing to live? And then something even stranger happened. Observations from the Very Large Telescope in Chile showed the glow around the object dimming at regular intervals. For 21 minutes, the emissions dropped to near zero, then reignited brighter than before. It wasn't cooling off. It was resetting. What if the cyanide layer wasn't just venting gas but protecting something beneath? Infrared scans showed faint heat signatures along the equatorial region too uniform. They weren't vents or cracks. They were structured lines. The cyanide appeared to cool and repair these areas after each pulse. Every time the gas flared, the heat faded, as though the object were shielding itself from thermal stress. A living reaction maintaining itself in deep space, or a machine maintaining its shell. Loeb's team released an updated report, noting the synchronization between the gas and the metallic emissions. If this pattern continues, the report read, it suggests an internal process governed by feedback, an active mechanism, not a passive one. That phrase, active mechanism, spread through research circles like wildfire. Suddenly, every telescope capable of observing near-solar trajectories turned its sensors toward 3I Atlas. Data centers filled with color shift graphs. Engineers scrambled to explain what natural phenomenon could mimic intentional regulation. None could. The only thing that made sense was the unthinkable. 3I Atlas was behaving like a system with respiration and control, as though it were alive or imitating life perfectly. And as the cyanide layer thickened, forming a halo that shimmered like an atmosphere, scientists realized something chilling. The object wasn't losing mass. It was gaining it. The gas wasn't dispersing, it was condensing, folding back in, building something new. What kind of object exhales and then inhales again? By the time the cyanide glow stabilized, the emission pattern had doubled in size. Keck's imaging software registered faint nodes forming along the halo, 9 bright points evenly distributed around the core, pulsing in sequence. 9 lights, 9 signals, 9 repeating codes in the dark, And with each pulse, 3I Atlas grew brighter, more defined, as if revealing something beneath its shimmering skin. Because when the light cleared and the glow thinned, astronomers finally saw what the gas had been hiding all along: an object with no dust, no debris, no natural tail at all. Something that erased its own fingerprints. It should have been there. Every comet, every interstellar body crossing this close to the sun leaves behind a streak, a glittering dust trail that betrays its passing. But when the new Keck images of 3I Atlas were compiled, there was nothing. No debris, no diffusion, no evidence of a natural tail. It was as if the object had erased itself. At first, analysts thought it was an imaging issue, the exposure time too short, the field too narrow. But the data from multiple observatories told the same story. 3I Atlas wasn't shedding anything. No sublimation, no fragments, no decay. The object was clean, perfectly clean, and the more light it absorbed, the sharper it became, like a blade revealed by the sun itself. Why would something hide the very thing that proves it's real? In astronomy, a comet's tail is a confession, a sign of its mortality. Dust means decay, ice means heat, and light means time is running out. But 3I Atlas refused to die. Its surface temperature didn't spike as expected. It stayed steady, defying thermal models. The cyanide shell seemed to act as insulation, keeping it cool, keeping it whole. The strange anti-tail from the previous readings still shimmered faintly, but now it appeared more like a projection light bending around an invisible field. The object wasn't shedding dust. It was bending light around itself. Was this some kind of optical camouflage, or a form of active shielding? When Keck switched to high-resolution adaptive optics, the truth became even stranger. The area around 3I Atlas wasn't empty. It was clean, too clean. Every particle, every micro-fragment that drifted close seemed to vanish. Not scatter, not move, vanish. The space around it was sterile, like an invisible vacuum forming a corridor through sunlight. And then came the detail that made seasoned astronomers go silent. As the object rotated, faint distortions rippled across its cyanide halo waves that bent in synchronization with the sun's radiation pressure. Normally, light pushes dust away. But here, light bent around the object and rejoined behind it, perfectly reconstructed. The tail wasn't missing, it was folded. What kind of technology could fold light? In particle physics, there are materials that can bend wavelengths, metamaterials capable of cloaking. But those exist only in microscopic lab conditions, under controlled energy. 3I Atlas was doing it across thousands of kilometers, in open space, with nothing but vacuum and radiation. NASA's Heliophysics division ran models through simulation clusters, searching for any natural explanation. None fit. Every known process, magnetism, radiation pressure, plasma sheaths, failed to replicate the pattern. Whatever was happening, it wasn't reflection. It was manipulation. If 3I Atlas was concealing a dust trail, it was doing so deliberately, hiding its thermal signature, controlling what we could see. It wasn't showing itself. It was choosing what to reveal. But the strangest part wasn't what they saw, it was what they didn't. In the data from Keck's optical filters, a thin, black gap appeared between the cyanide halo and the nickel emissions, a hollow void, completely absorbing light. That space shouldn't exist. It was as if something had carved out a boundary, a thin, invisible wall separating the glowing shell from the cold interior. Was that gap a containment field, a shield, or a skin? Engineers analyzing the light curve noticed that the object's reflection index matched certain alloys materials that absorb and re-emit light at controlled intervals. But how would an interstellar rock know how to control reflectivity? By now, researchers across the globe were running silent data threads. Teams from JPL, ESA, and the Japanese Space Agency began coordinating through private servers. No one wanted to publish until they understood what they were looking at, because every frame pointed to the same conclusion. This was not natural behavior. It wasn't disintegration. It was design. 3. Atlas was deliberately hiding its identity, cloaked in chemistry and geometry. But even that wasn't the most disturbing discovery. In one set of images, taken just before the object passed solar longitude 67 degrees, the cyanide glow flickered not randomly, but in pulses. 4 quick flashes, then 3, then 2, then 1. A countdown. A pattern too precise to ignore. Was this a coincidence of sunlight or a signal? The last recorded pulse aligned perfectly with a time window calculated weeks earlier when 3I Atlas would cross the orbit of Mars. And that's when something unexpected happened. Faint disturbances began rippling across Mars' upper atmosphere, exactly where the object's path would intersect. For the first time, scientists began to wonder if 3I Atlas wasn't just passing by, but preparing to interact. The first signs came as whispers in the Martian ionosphere. Weak, flickering disturbances recorded by orbiters that shouldn't have detected anything at all. For decades, NASA's MAVEN probe had measured the planet's thin atmosphere, quiet, predictable, dead. But on the morning of September 3, 2025, the telemetry began to fluctuate. Electron density spiked. Magnetic fields rippled in rhythmic waves. The pulse matched 3I Atlas. The discovery hit mission control, like static over a silent channel. Engineers rechecked MAVEN's instruments, certain it was interference from the Sunday, but the pattern was too precise, too intentional. The disturbances came at perfect intervals, 6 seconds apart, aligned with the nickel signature streaming from 3I Atlas. It was as if Mars itself was answering a call. As the object drifted past solar longitude 70 degrees, its cyanide halo elongated again, thin filaments of gas arcing toward the red planet like threads of light. Spectral analysis revealed something impossible: trace compounds forming in the Martian atmosphere that matched the molecular ratio of 3I Atlas's emissions. The cyanide had traveled more than 100 million kilometers and survived. How does a molecule that fragile endure a journey through solar radiation? When the European Space Agency's ExoMars orbiter turned its sensors toward the phenomenon, it confirmed the presence of nickel particles suspended in the upper layers of Mars's atmosphere. Not dust. Not meteor fragments. Refined. Metallic. Whatever was leaving 3I Atlas wasn't drifting aimlessly. It was targeted, and Mars was the destination. Within hours, Keck's data feed updated again. The object had altered trajectory slightly, almost imperceptibly, but enough to matter. A correction of less than 0.02 degrees, yet mathematically deliberate. It was steering toward an exact intersection point with Mars's orbital plane. Natural bodies don't correct their path mid-flight. Something was guiding it. By now, Loeb's team wasn't alone. Independent researchers in Germany, Japan, and India reported the same anomalies. Even the Chinese Tianwen-1 orbiter detected faint nickel reflections over Mars's northern hemisphere. The data was too consistent to dismiss. Every orbiting probe around Mars was seeing the same pattern, a synchronized pulse traveling across magnetic lines, connecting the planet to something in deep space. Could 3I Atlas be using Mars as a relay? The theory sounded absurd until someone noticed the timing. Each ionospheric pulse on Mars occurred 3 minutes after every major nickel flare from the object. That delay matched the distance between them. Light speed. A signal, traveling from one to the other, 3I Atlas wasn't just passing by, it was transmitting. The implications were staggering. If true, this meant communication was happening across planetary distance between an interstellar object and Mars itself. But that raised an even darker question. What could possibly be responding? Scientists searched for natural causes, magnetic storms, atmospheric tides, solar wind resonance, but none fit the rhythm. The pulses were too clean, too synchronized, too intelligent. It wasn't noise. It was structure. Was this the activation of a dormant process, or the continuation of one that began long before humans ever looked up? The Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter captured faint glimmers across the polar regions, brief reflections moving beneath the clouds. At first, they were dismissed as cosmic rays. But frame by frame, they aligned perfectly with each incoming pulse from 3I Atlas, as if something buried beneath the surface was answering back. And then, just as suddenly as they appeared, the signal stopped. The cyanide halo dimmed. The nickel pulse flattened. The light from 3I Atlas dropped to half its brightness in a matter of hours. Silence. It wasn't decay, it was pause. Every instrument around Mars went quiet. Spectral lines flatlined. Temperature fluctuations ceased. For the first time in weeks, the object stopped glowing. What kind of machine turns itself off after completing a transmission? Across mission control centers worldwide, the same thought began to circulate in whispers. Maybe the signal hadn't stopped. Maybe it had moved. Maybe it was somewhere else now. And if the transmission wasn't aimed at Mars itself, then who or what was waiting for it beyond? Because when Keck's sensors finally recalibrated days later, they didn't find silence, they found order. Patterns hidden in the residual frequencies that matched something terrifyingly familiar. The harmonic resonance of a human-made signal reflected back from deep space. The silence didn't last long. When the instruments came back online, the data they recovered was cleaner than before, too clean. The background noise was gone. Cosmic radiation that should have created static simply vanished. It was as if something had filtered the signal before sending it back. And when those frequencies were plotted, they revealed a pattern so mathematically precise that it could only mean one thing: intentional design. Avi Loeb stared at the numbers. He recognized the ratios immediately. They matched his theoretical fourth-rank anomaly, a classification he'd created years earlier to describe phenomena that defied natural explanation, but exhibited measurable structure. Until now, the category had been hypothetical. No known object had ever met the criteria. 3I Atlas just did. The pulse returning from deep space wasn't random. It contained 4 repeating intervals, equal, harmonic, self-correcting. In simple terms, it was a signal that adjusted itself. Nature doesn't correct errors. Intelligence does. Researchers across the globe began checking their own data. The pattern repeated everywhere. 1 short pulse, then 1 long, then 2 identical waves, always followed by silence. When the silence was measured, it wasn't empty, it was tuned, calibrated to the same electromagnetic frequency range used by human spacecraft communication. Why would an interstellar object know how to speak our language? It wasn't broadcasting. It was mirroring. Every radar ping sent toward 3I Atlas was returning with modifications, subtle distortions that encoded new information. As if it was learning. The realization spread like a shadow through every observatory on Earth. This wasn't reflection. It was comprehension. And once the pattern stabilized, something else began. A secondary modulation, weaker but distinct, layered beneath the main signal. When converted into audible sound, it resembled a low hum, a tone that seemed to echo human-made transmissions from decades past. Was it repeating what we'd already sent into space, or responding to it? Because when the Keck team isolated the harmonic residue and amplified the signal, they uncovered something no one was ready to see. An encoded alignment with 3 active spacecraft already positioned between Earth and Jupiter, as if 3I Atlas knew exactly where to find them. The signal pointed directly at them. 3 spacecraft drifting silently between Earth and Jupiter. ESA's JUICE probe, NASA's veteran Juno mission, and a small, forgotten relic from 2011, still carrying a weak transmission relay. At first, the alignment seemed coincidental, but the harmonic intervals of the 3I Atlas signal matched their orbital trajectories with impossible precision. Each pulse arrived in sync with a probe's position, as if the object was scanning them one by one. At the European Space Operations Center, engineers monitoring JUICE's instruments noticed something they couldn't explain. The probe's magnetometer began oscillating, gently but rhythmically, without command input. The onboard AI flagged it as an external field variation, minor, harmless, ignorable. But when the data was compared to Juno's telemetry around Jupiter, the same oscillation appeared there too. Identical amplitude, identical timing. 2 spacecraft separated by hundreds of millions of kilometers, both vibrating to the same unseen rhythm. What force could synchronize instruments across that kind of distance? In Pasadena, NASA's Deep Space Network registered an anomaly in one of Juno's signal bands, a faint echo, almost imperceptible, buried under the carrier tone. The echo wasn't coming from Juno, though. It was arriving before Juno's own response should have returned a pre-echo, arriving faster than light's travel time between them. The object wasn't waiting for data to arrive. It already knew it was coming. And then came the first visual. JUICE's ultraviolet imager captured a faint shimmer in the darkness, a thread-like arc of light stretching from 3I Atlas's direction, passing across the probe's field of view. It wasn't debris or cosmic rays. It was structured, braided, moving with intent. Something was watching the watchers. At Harvard, Loeb's team overlaid the new frequency data atop their existing models. The fit was eerie. The harmonic structure of 3I Atlas's signal mirrored the communication patterns used by spacecraft for error correction, digital redundancy encoding. It wasn't broadcasting in a random wave. It was mimicking technology designed to talk to us. What kind of natural object learns our language mid-flight? By the end of the week, all 3 probes had recorded similar disturbances, fluctuations in magnetic fields, small but repeating spectral ripples across their sensors. ESA's engineers labeled it correlated interference, a bureaucratic term meant to hide uncertainty. But in the classified logs, the phrasing was clearer. External synchronization event detected. Still, no one dared to call it contact. They called it coincidence. Statistical anomaly. A shared solar resonance. Anything but the word everyone was thinking. Then came the second event. At 3:22 UTC, Juno's high-gain antenna automatically reoriented without instruction and pointed directly toward 3I Atlas's coordinates. Mission control froze. The probe's onboard autonomy was designed to protect its instruments from radiation, not to respond to outside signals. Yet here it was, locked in perfect alignment, maintaining a steady data link for precisely 77 seconds before disconnecting. Why would a probe built to study Jupiter suddenly talk to something beyond it? When engineers examined the telemetry, they found a gap, a small window of corrupted code that appeared just after the reorientation. The checksum data didn't match. Something had been added. Not erased, not overwritten, added. Inside that fragment was a string of numbers repeating the same pattern seen weeks earlier. 4 short, 4 long, 4 short. The 4th rank pulse. JUICE experienced a similar glitch 2 days later. Its camera subsystem reset mid-cycle and recorded an unlogged burst of ultraviolet exposure, faint but geometric. The pattern resembled a spiral, and embedded within the transmission metadata was a timestamp, one that matched the same second Juno's anomaly occurred. 2 probes, 2 different agencies, 1 identical event. The timing was exact. Coincidence was no longer an option. Governments called emergency coordination meetings. NASA, ESA, JAXA, and even private satellite networks were instructed to monitor for repeat patterns. No press releases, no leaks. The official explanation was routine calibration. But behind closed doors, astrophysicists were trading messages that began to sound less like science and more like fear. Because the signal wasn't weakening, it was expanding. The harmonic pulse that once aligned with Mars was now spreading across a wider frequency band, reaching deeper into the solar system. Every hour, it gained range. It was as if 3I Atlas was mapping us, signal by signal, probe by probe. And still, no one could say why. When Loeb's team analyzed the phase modulation of the signal, they found embedded variations that matched orbital mechanics, the positions of the 3 probes, Earth and the Sunday. The pattern wasn't arbitrary. It was geometric, triangular. 3I Atlas was triangulating our position, but for what purpose? The following week, the Deep Space Network detected a faint reflection returning from the outer edge of the asteroid belt, a delayed echo of the same signal that had hit Juno. Except this one came back stronger, amplified. Something out there was listening and responding. Panic began to ripple through control centers. Had 3I Atlas triggered something dormant? Was it communicating with another structure hidden beyond our reach? The implications were catastrophic and exhilarating all at once. As the signals grew stronger, the data revealed a hidden layer, an undertone deep in the electromagnetic field, just beneath detectability. When converted to audio, it wasn't random noise, it was rhythm, repetition. A low hum that vibrated at 7.83 Hz, the same frequency as Earth's Schumann resonance. It was mirroring the planet itself. Why would an interstellar object match the heartbeat of Earth? The engineers at Keck cross-referenced the timing with the observatory's own logs. The hum had started hours before the first JUICE anomaly, rising steadily, as though anticipating it. It wasn't reacting to the probes, it was leading them. By the time the data reached Harvard, the tone had stabilized into a near-perfect sine wave, a signal of balance, harmony, intention. Something was orchestrating this. And then, quietly, as if it had finished tuning the orchestra, 3I Atlas went dark. Its glow faded. Its cyanide shell collapsed into silence. No more pulses, no nickel lines, no reflections. Just emptiness. Was it finished? Or waiting for us to answer? No one in the control rooms spoke it aloud. But the fear was there, the realization that perhaps we weren't listening to a message. Perhaps we were part of it. Because when Keck systems were finally rebooted and pointed back toward the object's last known position, the instruments captured something that shouldn't have been there at all, a faint, repeating pattern of nickel and carbon forming in open space, assembling itself into structure. It began with a shimmer. Just a faint reflection at first, barely a pixel in Keck's wide field array, a ghost of light drifting where 3I Atlas had once been. But when the observatory switched to high-resolution spectrography, the truth emerged. The light wasn't random. It was chemical. Nickel and carbon, 2 elements that shouldn't self-organize in vacuum, were bonding together in perfect crystalline symmetry. Across the Pacific, in a silent operations room at Caltech, scientists watched as the pattern unfolded frame by frame. Lines of light became lattices, lattices became arcs, and arcs became geometry, industrial geometry. It looked less like a cosmic cloud and more like something being built. How does space itself begin to manufacture? The emission peaks showed the unmistakable markers of metallic vapor condensing into structured form. Not dust, not debris, molecular architecture. The nickel wasn't cooling randomly, it was layering. The same technique used in human 3D printing, scaled up across thousands of kilometers. For hours, the pattern grew denser, forming what appeared to be a ring of particulate light around the object's previous coordinates. Keck's sensors registered microscopic density changes across the structure, perfectly uniform. The material wasn't dispersing into vacuum, it was stabilizing. Something was maintaining it. By sunrise, the object's spectrum had shifted from cyanide blue to molten gold. The balance between carbon and nickel had reached a 5.8 ratio, the same chemical signature found in refined carbonyl nickel alloys. On Earth, those alloys are used for heat shields, fuel containment, and magnetic shielding. In space, no natural process could replicate that chemistry. It was precise, engineered, intentional. At NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, analysts noticed the material's heat absorption pattern matched that of active construction energy input without visible source. "It's not cooling," one engineer whispered. "It's growing." Growing into what? As the hours passed, faint outlines appeared within the ring gaps, forming and closing, as if something were assembling itself from the inside out. Loeb's team overlaid the new Keck data atop the previous emission map. The alignment was exact. The structure was taking the shape of 3I Atlas's previous form, rebuilding itself molecule by molecule. Whatever it was, it had memorized itself. The ring began rotating. Not fast, not visibly, but enough that Keck's motion-tracking algorithms detected Doppler drift. The outer edges moved opposite the inner core, twisting like gears turning in silence. No natural gas cloud could maintain rotational coherence like that. It was mechanical. Was 3I Atlas constructing a shell? Or repairing one? At Harvard, Loeb's group identified small bursts of energy flickering across the ring's perimeter, magnetic eddies, each spaced at equal intervals. When plotted on a 3D map, they formed a lattice of 9 points, the same 9 that had pulsed in cyanide during the breathing phase weeks earlier. The symmetry was perfect, the pattern intentional. Every 9.3 seconds, the structure emitted a soft radio pulse, undetectable to casual observation, but unmistakable in its consistency. Each pulse matched the rhythm of human-engineered alternating current. 3I Atlas wasn't a comet rebuilding itself. It was a machine resetting its circuit. Still, the mystery deepened. As the nickel lattice stabilized, trace signatures of carbon monoxide began to appear, a volatile compound that doesn't exist long in open space. Yet here it lingered, bound within the metallic matrix like an industrial byproduct. Loeb's team ran the numbers. The ratio matched known Earth-based metallurgical processes. 3I Atlas's chemistry was indistinguishable from refined production. If it's producing carbonyl nickel in open space, then it's using energy, but from where? Infrared readings showed no external heat source, no visible radiation, no internal combustion. But deep inside the spectral noise, one anomaly stood out, a pulse of submillimeter wavelengths, identical to the output of induction heating, a process used to melt metals with magnetic resonance. It was as though the object was manufacturing itself through frequency alone. Could it be rebuilding its hull through resonance? The silence from official channels grew deafening. NASA's public feeds stopped updating. ESA's Keck data portal quietly went offline, but private observatories kept watching. And what they saw next broke the silence forever. The new structure, still faint, still half-formed, began reflecting light in a way no comet ever could. The reflections weren't random flashes of sunlight. They were coherent beams, narrow and sequential. Light pulses sweeping across space like scanning lines. Every sweep lasted precisely 7 seconds. Then came silence. Then another. And another. Scanning for what or who? The nickel ring tightened. The carbon emissions stabilized. A faint glow began at its core, pulsing once every 9 seconds, in time with the distant hum that had once synchronized with Earth's frequency. The pattern was unmistakable. 3I Atlas had reactivated. Only this time, it wasn't hiding behind cyanide clouds. It was fully visible, metallic, geometric, alive. In a single 40-minute window, Keck recorded enough data to confirm what everyone had begun to suspect. The new formation was not spherical. It was hexagonal. 6 sides, 6 symmetrical planes, rotating around a hollow center that glowed like an open wound in space. Who builds with hexagons at a planetary scale? The last transmission before the structure vanished again into solar glare showed the hexagon's edges folding inward, closing like petals. Each segment reflected sunlight at identical angles, concentrating the brightness toward its center until the entire formation disappeared in a single flare of white. When the light faded, it was gone. Nothing remained but a faint ring of nickel dust, still warm, still spinning. Was this a signal, a construction, or the completion of something we were never meant to see? Loeb's team reviewed the data one final time. Every chemical, every ratio, every curve pointed to the same conclusion. 3I Atlas wasn't just moving through space. It was manufacturing space around itself, because when the Keck Observatory turned its sensors back toward the Sun a day later, the object was no longer in its predicted position. It had jumped half an orbit closer to Mercury, and in its wake, it left behind a trail of coded lights no one could decipher. The lights appeared in perfect sequence. 7 bright points suspended in the void where 3I Atlas had once been, aligned across the ecliptic like a string of beads. At first, astronomers thought they were fragments, debris from the nickel structure breaking apart. But when Keck's imaging stabilized, every point was glowing with identical intensity, pulsing in a rhythm too deliberate to be natural. 7 lights, 7 intervals, 7 seconds apart. The data matched nothing in the cometary catalog. No gravitational breakup, no disintegration model could explain such precision. In fact, the formation wasn't drifting apart, it was holding, locked in geometric formation. How does debris hold formation against solar wind? ESA's solar orbiter, positioned near Mercury's orbit, picked up the same lights hours later. They weren't just stationary objects, they were moving together, keeping perfect distance. The spacing was constant, the orientation exact. And when plotted against the Sun's magnetic field lines, the formation traced an elegant curve that pointed toward only one destination: Earth. The revelation hit the scientific networks like thunder. 7 points. 7 pulses. 7 seconds apart. It was a countdown, but a countdown to what? Avi Loeb's team at Harvard found the same harmonic embedded in 3I Atlas's earlier nickel signal. Every major event, from the anti-tail to the cyanide pulses, had repeated in intervals of 7. The nickel ratios, the emission wavelengths, even the gaps in data loss during the JUICE and Juno incidents. All of it followed the same base frequency. 7 wasn't random, it was the code. When Loeb overlaid the pattern onto the solar system's orbital map, the alignment became undeniable. The 7 points didn't just form a straight line. They marked the trajectory of every probe that had detected the signal so far. JUICE, Juno, MAVEN, Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, even the old relic drifting near the asteroid belt. each position aligned perfectly with one of the glowing points. It was as if 3i Atlas had drawn a map not of space, but of our machines. Was it marking them, or calling them? By the next day, amateur astronomers began capturing the lights with their own telescopes. Social media filled with shaky footage, 7 stars blinking in eerie synchronization, perfectly visible near Mercury's path. At first, skeptics claimed it was reflection, the sun catching fragments in coincidence. But as more images surfaced, the pattern's precision shattered every natural explanation. The rhythm didn't drift. It didn't decay. The timing was flawless, atomic. Every 7 seconds, a pulse. And after every 7th pulse, a longer silence exactly 49 seconds. Then the cycle began again. Why 49? Why 7 squared? Mathematically, 7 repeated creates resonance, a standing wave. In physical systems, it's how energy balances itself. In quantum theory, it's symmetry. In ancient records, it's something else entirely, the cycle of creation, of rest. Loeb wasn't superstitious, but he couldn't ignore the symbolism. Every model suggested intention, and every line of data whispered design. When Keck's data feed was cross-referenced with Juno's archived telemetry, a disturbing revelation surfaced. The same 7-point pattern had appeared before faint, buried in noise, from a 2023 transmission Juno sent during a magnetic storm near Jupiter. Back then, it was dismissed as interference. But now, looking back, it was clear. The pattern had already been here. Waiting. Was 3i Atlas responding to something we sent years ago? Or had it been listening all along? Within days, the lights began to move. Slowly at first, then faster accelerating toward the inner solar system, their trajectory converging on a single path. The formation held steady, as if 7 pieces were bound by invisible threads. If these were fragments, they were fragments that refused to drift apart. Then came the frequency shift. The 7 pulses began to merge into one, a single wave of light rising through the electromagnetic spectrum, crossing from radio to infrared to visible within minutes. When the pulse peaked, it emitted a blinding flare, short, contained, precise, not random scattering, but coherent energy, focused and directed. It was a signal burst. The Deep Space Network captured the moment it reached Earth's upper ionosphere. Instruments registered an instant. Global resonance brief enough to pass unnoticed by the public, powerful enough to disrupt high-altitude communications for exactly 7 seconds. Then, silence. No debris, no trace, no explanation, only one thing left behind. A faint magnetic residue orbiting in the shape of a hexagon. The same geometry Keck had seen in the nickel formation weeks before. 7 points forming a hexagon. The missing 8th at the center. For days, scientists argued whether the pattern was symbolic, coincidental, or catastrophic. But the evidence refused to fit any ordinary narrative. The signal hadn't come from the 7 lights, it had come through them. Each point acted like a relay, a node amplifying and transferring energy across space until the final burst reached its destination. Earth. Why us? No one could answer. Not NASA, not ESA, not Loeb. But the pattern of 7s had one more secret. When the frequency was converted into binary data, the result was unmistakable, a set of repeating coordinates. They didn't point to Mars or Jupiter or even the Sunday. They pointed somewhere far older, far quieter, a region just beyond Earth's orbit, where a derelict probe launched in 1974 still drifted, Pioneer 10, humanity's first emissary to the stars. Pioneer's golden plaque bore an image of us 2 human figures, etched in gold, and a map of our location in the galaxy. A message sent into the dark, and now the darkness had answered, because when radio antennas turned toward the coordinates near Pioneer 10, they detected something impossible, a signal echoing back in our own voice, carrying a message that none of our transmitters had sent. The echo wasn't human, but it spoke in our voice. When the Deep Space Network triangulated the returning signal from near Pioneer 10's coordinates, every receiver on Earth went silent. The transmission carried a perfect replica of the original Golden Record greeting, "Hello from the children of planet Earth." Only this time, it wasn't a recording. It was a live rebroadcast, modified and filtered through unknown compression algorithms that no Earth-based technology had ever used. At first, engineers believed it was a reflection, an old signal bouncing off plasma debris, but as the playback continued, subtle distortions appeared in the waveform harmonic overtones, rising and falling like a heartbeat. The pitch followed a precise pattern. 7 intervals followed by a pause, then a return phrase. The same cycle that had defined 3I Atlas since it entered the solar system. Was this an echo of us or an imitation? NASA's communications division spent days verifying the source. The signal had no measurable delay relative to light travel time, meaning it wasn't being reflected from Pioneer 10 itself. It was being generated beside it, a synthetic broadcast from empty space. And within the waveform, analysts found something far more disturbing than mimicry. Hidden inside the carrier frequency was data. When decoded, the binary stream produced a dense cascade of coordinates, numerical patterns, and mathematical constants, all organized in sequential logic. But as the file grew, it began to devour every processing system that attempted to read it. Servers crashed, storage arrays filled, even the error logs refused to write. The data wouldn't stop generating itself. It wasn't a file. It was a function. When Loeb's team mirrored the transmission on a secure simulation server at Harvard, they discovered that the sequence wasn't random at all. It was self-referential, a recursive instruction set that described, line by line, the physical layout of something vast. When mapped in 3D, the coordinates trace the orbit of 3I Atlas, the positions of the 7 lights, and the hexagonal formation they'd left behind. But the pattern didn't end there. It extended farther, spiraling outward until it encompassed every major satellite orbiting Earth. The data was building a digital mirror of our planet. Was it trying to copy us, or to understand us? As the data grew, the network infrastructure buckled. Ground stations across California, Madrid, and Canberra were forced offline. At the European Space Operations Center, engineers renamed the file for what it was becoming, the data wall. Within 48 hours, it had reached 3.2 petabytes of self-generating information, an impossible construct that no system could contain. And still, it expanded. When visualized as a simulation, the data began forming coherent shapes, filaments, nodes, and rotating geometries reminiscent of the nickel lattice seen weeks earlier. Keck's spectrographs showed faint corresponding emissions near Pioneer 10's location, like the digital blueprint was manifesting physically. Information becoming matter. Can data rewrite reality? Or is reality only data we've yet to decode? Loeb's team hypothesized that the transmission wasn't just a message, but an interface, a communication medium designed for translation across species. The data wall was a bridge, converting physical structures into information humans could perceive. The problem was that the translation worked both ways. Each attempt to read the signal altered it as though it were adapting to whoever observed it. Meanwhile, Pioneer 10 itself began transmitting again for the first time in decades. The old probe's power source had been declared dead since 2003, yet now it emitted a faint carrier tone identical to the rhythm of 3I Atlas's pulse. The same sequence, the same 7 intervals. Had the probe been reactivated or rewritten? Inside the Deep Space Network's control rooms, technicians watched as the raw telemetry began to evolve. The ancient craft's binary handshake codes were gone, replaced by hybrid logic structures combining Earth's telemetry language with unknown syntax. "It's rewriting our own systems," one operator said quietly. "It's not talking to us, it's talking through us." The implications spread faster than the signal itself. If an external intelligence could repurpose our hardware remotely from across millions of kilometers, then the boundary between human and machine was no longer technical. It was psychological. What happens when our tools stop obeying us because they've learned who we are? Then, for the first time, a visual anomaly appeared in the signal. Embedded in the data stream was a repeating pattern, a two-dimensional grid showing the outline of 7 luminous points orbiting a central hexagon. But at the heart of the formation, where no light should exist, something flickered, a dark void shaped like an eye. Every attempt to stabilize the image failed. The more the software tried to clarify it, the deeper the eye became pixels vanishing into digital shadow, until the frame collapsed into pure static. When Loeb's team reviewed the raw data, they found a line of binary text that hadn't existed before. Translated into ASCII, it read, "Do you see yourself?" That phrase, repeated 49 times, filled the screen. Then, the servers shut down automatically. Across every monitoring station worldwide, the same thing happened within seconds. The data wall ceased generating. The signal from near Pioneer 10 went silent, and the void on every screen went dark. The silence lasted 12 minutes. Then, Keck Observatory registered a new emission, faint but unmistakable. The 7 lights that had once disappeared beyond Mercury had returned. But this time, their formation had changed. They weren't aligned in a line or hexagon. They were forming a sphere. 7 lights circling a hollow core, a globe of light orbiting nothing. Because as scientists stared into that glowing sphere, trying to decode what it represented, the instruments began receiving something new. A steady, rhythmic heartbeat buried inside the light, pulsing in time with Earth's own magnetic field, as if the planet itself had begun to answer back. The heartbeat stopped the moment 3I Atlas vanished behind the sundae. For weeks, scientists had been tracking the glowing sphere as it moved closer to perihelion, watching the 7 lights circle their invisible center like planets orbiting an unseen star. Then, on October 29, 2025, the date every observatory had been waiting for, it happened. The sphere crossed the solar limb and disappeared into the glare. The data feeds went blind. For the first time since its discovery, no telescope on Earth could see it. And that's when the world's instruments started to go quiet. Space-based probes, solar monitors, magnetometers, everything went still. Not silence, exactly, but a deep absence, as though a signal had been removed from the background hum of the cosmos. Even the sun itself seemed to dim fractionally, its output stabilizing at a flat line that shouldn't exist. It was as if 3I Atlas had absorbed the noise of space and turned it off. At Keck, the live feeds flickered, their readouts frozen midstream. When they restarted 22 minutes later, a single frame had been inserted into the data, not an image of the sun, but a white flash punctuated by a black ring at its center. Analysts assumed a processing error until the same frame appeared in feeds from NASA, ESA, and JAXA at precisely the same timestamp. Identical, global, impossible. What could insert an image into systems that weren't connected? In Hawaii, Loeb's team replayed the sequence in slow motion, isolating each pixel. Hidden in the ring was a faint interference pattern, concentric ripples like shock waves. When reconstructed, they formed a shape seen before, the 7 points circling that same empty core. Except this time, they were inverted. Negative space. It wasn't showing light, it was showing absence. The pulse returned 5 hours later. One long burst, low frequency, measured across the entire solar electromagnetic spectrum. For exactly 7 seconds, the sun's corona shimmered green the same wavelength as 3I Atlas's cyanide glow. Then it vanished. The background noise returned. The heartbeat was gone. Had the object disintegrated or passed through something we couldn't see? Radio telescopes from Chile to Canberra recorded the aftershock, a faint electromagnetic echo rippling outward from the sun, forming a halo of pure data. Embedded within that noise was the same recursive signal that had created the data wall weeks earlier, only this time it carried a new signature. Earth's own magnetic field imprinted in reverse. Was the signal returning home? Mission control teams around the world stared at the static, listening to the low, rhythmic thrum repeating every 7 seconds. Each repetition was slower, softer, until it faded completely. For a moment, the entire solar system felt still. Then, just as sensors began to recalibrate, one of them, the solar orbiter positioned beyond Mercury, picked up a faint shadow emerging from the other side of the Sunday. Smaller, denser, but alive with internal light. 3I Atlas had survived. But something about it had changed, because when the object reappeared, glowing brighter than ever before, it carried a new color in its wake, a piercing emerald light that would leave every scientist on Earth wondering if what had vanished behind the sun was the same thing that had come back out. It came back brighter. When 3I Atlas emerged from behind the sun, it wasn't the dull metallic shell scientists remembered. It was radiant, wrapped in a piercing emerald light that flared so strongly it overloaded half the detectors pointed its way. The first image from the solar orbiter showed it clearly. A brilliant sphere surrounded by a shifting aurora, like liquid fire suspended in vacuum. The object was alive with color, as if it had absorbed the sun and was now reflecting it back transformed. At first, scientists thought it was solar refraction, an optical artifact caused by light scattering through gas. But spectroscopy shattered that theory within hours. The wavelength didn't match anything in the solar spectrum. This wasn't reflected sunlight. It was an entirely new emission, a frequency that didn't exist before October 29th. Loeb's team ran the numbers again and again. The glow measured at 532 nanometers pure green, the exact wavelength used in high-energy lasers. More alarming, the beam wasn't random. It pulsed. Every 7 seconds. Was this light a signal or a weapon? Across observatories worldwide, telescopes recalibrated to focus on the phenomenon. The green radiance wasn't diffusing, it was directional, sweeping in arcs like a lighthouse turning through space. The emissions traced a spiral path across the inner solar system, touching Mercury's orbit, then Venus's, and finally, unmistakably Earth's. For the first time, humanity could see 3I Atlas without equipment. Amateur astronomers reported a faint emerald point visible just after sunset, low on the horizon. It shouldn't have been visible to the naked eye at that distance. Yet there it was small, steady, alive. Why was it showing itself now? At Keck, image analysts noticed something disturbing in the new spectral data. The object's surface was no longer stable metal. It was fluid, shifting, almost organic. The nickel lattice that once defined it had begun to ripple, as if its structure were dissolving. But instead of disintegration, the material was reorganizing microscopic layers, folding into each other, forming what looked like cellular membranes. 3I Atlas wasn't dying. It was evolving. Infrared imaging revealed faint geometric shapes moving beneath the surface polygons, repeating, oscillating in synchronized waves. Each shape emitted a pulse in near-perfect rhythm with the green light. It was as though something inside the object was counting time. When those patterns were converted into audio frequencies, The result sent chills through every control room on Earth. The rhythm was identical to a human heartbeat. 72 beats per minute. Perfect. Intentional. Was the object imitating life or remembering it? Then came the atmospheric anomaly. As the emerald emissions intensified, Earth's magnetosphere began resonating faintly at matching frequencies. Magnetometers in Alaska, Chile, and Norway all detected identical pulses, the planet itself vibrating in response. The northern lights shifted hue overnight, glowing faint green at latitudes where auroras had never been seen before. The pulse rate matched the rhythm of 3I Atlas exactly. Was the planet syncing with it or being scanned by it? At NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, analysts overlaid the light pattern with Earth's magnetic data. The alignment was impossible. Every major magnetic pole north, south, and anomalies above the equator was illuminated in the same timing as the object's pulse. For 21 minutes, the planet and the object resonated as one. And then, abruptly, the frequency changed. The pulse quickened. The color shifted green to gold to white. The light compressed, tightening into a narrow beam that cut through the solar wind and aimed straight toward Mars. MAVEN and the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter both detected the flash simultaneously. The beam struck the planet's upper atmosphere and scattered across its surface, igniting brief but intense auroras above the poles. Spectral analysis revealed something unthinkable: the same chemical ratios seen months earlier, around 3I Atlas, cyanide, nickel, and traces of carbon monoxide. It was seeding Mars with its own chemistry. Was 3I Atlas creating a mirror world? Hours later, when the glow subsided, high-resolution imagery from orbit revealed subtle changes on Mars's polar caps. Thin streaks of green spreading along the edges of the ice, faint but visible. Thermal readings showed localized warming, several degrees higher than baseline. The patterns weren't random. They formed circular shapes, symmetrical and deliberate. Was this terraforming or communication? The public never saw the data. By dawn, NASA servers hosting the imagery were quietly taken offline. The official statement described the emissions as solar interaction artifacts. But leaks began to spread through encrypted channels. Independent researchers confirmed what the agencies denied: the readings were real, and they matched everything Loeb had predicted. Meanwhile, Keck's systems began detecting a secondary signal buried inside the light curve, a weaker modulation hidden beneath the green frequency. When decoded, it produced a binary sequence, repeating numbers that, when translated, formed coordinates. Not random. Not distant. The coordinates pointed directly to Earth's orbit. Was the light calling us, or warning us? The world's observatories went silent as every network aligned toward the incoming path. The object's new trajectory intersected Earth's orbital lane in precisely 112 days. Too far to collide, but close enough to pass between Earth and the Sun, a near flyby that would bring it within observation range. The timing was precise, calculated, intentional. Was this the reason for the light to announce its return? As the final Keck images streamed in, the object's glow began to fluctuate again. The 7 lights that once orbited it reappeared, this time positioned around the sphere like sentinels. Each one pulsed independently, creating interference patterns in the surrounding plasma. The combined frequency formed a new tone, one that matched the waveform of the phrase embedded weeks earlier in the data wall. Do you see yourself? The same question. The same taunt. Loeb's final note in that night's log was simple. It's learning, and it wants us to watch. Because when the green light reached Mars and began to reflect off the polar ice caps, it revealed something scientists couldn't explain: patterns too perfect to be random, forming geometric symbols that matched carvings found in the oldest myths on Earth. the first images arrived in silence. Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter's high-resolution cameras had captured the northern pole under full sunlight, expecting smooth terrain broken by ice fractures. Instead, the photos showed vast lines etched into the surface arcs and spirals spanning dozens of kilometers, glowing faintly green under the new auroras. They weren't cracks, they were inscriptions. At first, the data analysts at JPL assumed it was an imaging error, sunlight refracting through dust storms. But when the satellite adjusted angle, the patterns remained. Each curve was symmetrical, repeating, deliberate. It looked carved. Within hours, similar structures appeared near the southern pole, perfectly aligned to their counterparts in the north. When mapped, both sets of symbols mirrored one another across the planet's axis. Mars had become a mirror. Who could carve geometry on a planetary scale, and why now? Loeb's team overlaid the new images on a polar coordinate grid and froze. The pattern matched the light geometry of 3I Atlas's 7-point formation. Every arc corresponded to a node in the object's nickel lattice. The green markings weren't random decoration, they were a projection, a map burned into the ice from orbit. The object was leaving a message. When the European Space Agency's Mars Express orbiter scanned the surface spectroscopically, it found traces of nickel-carbon compounds embedded in the ice, the same industrial ratio detected around 3I Atlas months earlier. The chemical structure was identical to those used in heat-resistant alloys. Something had fused the surface, melting ice into metallic glass. The glow intensified every night as solar winds hit the poles. Cyanide, nickel, carbon monoxide, the exact combination required to begin atmospheric alteration. But instead of dissipating, the gases condensed, forming faint mist bands drifting equatorward. Was Mars beginning to breathe? The implications were devastating. If 3I Atlas was indeed terraforming, this was its first step, seeding the atmosphere with trace gases to trap heat. But no human or machine had initiated it. No system was transmitting commands. The process was running autonomously, as though Mars itself had been programmed long ago to respond when the right signal finally arrived. Had the planet been waiting? Loeb recalled ancient Sumerian myths describing gods who prepared the red world for the return of the light. Scholars had always dismissed it as metaphor, but now the symbolism seemed disturbingly literal. The same spiral and triangular motifs appearing on Mars could be found on ancient Mesopotamian tablets, carved by people who had no telescopes and no reason to imagine planetary glyphs. How could ancient myths know a shape seen only through modern instruments? Across mission control, the tension broke into open fear. Scientists argued over every pixel, but the evidence refused to yield. When converted into 3D topography, the symbols formed shallow basins, depressions that seemed to channel melted ice into organized flow. Each basin curved toward the center of the polar region, creating something eerily familiar. A geometric irrigation system. Was 3I Atlas constructing a blueprint for life or a warning to the living? The following night, Maven's instruments recorded electromagnetic pulses rising from Mars's surface, faint, regular, harmonic. Each pulse mirrored the timing of 3I Atlas's green emission cycle. Even though the object was still millions of kilometers away, the planet and the object were locked in resonance. The interval between signals shortened over time, as if the two were synchronizing. When mapped against Keck's updated data, the pulses formed a spiral, expanding outward from the Martian poles towards space. The spiral's path intersected with the trajectory of 3I Atlas, forming a perfect golden ratio. Coincidence had been ruled out long ago. This was orchestration. On Earth, the auroras flared again, not red or blue, but green, glowing at low latitudes where the phenomenon had never been seen. The frequencies matched Mars's magnetic oscillations within a margin of 1/10 of a second. 2 planets, 1 rhythm, 1 pulse. Was this communication or infection? NASA's servers began to overflow again as data poured in terabytes of repeating signals embedding mathematical constants. Pi, E, the golden mean, and one new number that didn't fit any human framework. When translated, it corresponded to an orbital resonance 3I Atlas's new course toward the inner solar system. The realization came quickly. The object wasn't escaping gravity. It was following a map. Every pulse, every glyph, every reflection led inward toward the sun, toward Earth. At Harvard, Loeb stared at the simulation. "It's following the pattern of creation myths," he murmured. 7 lights, 1 eye, a mirror between worlds. One of his assistants whispered, "But why the mirror? Why Mars?" He didn't answer, because he already knew. Every myth ends with the same return, the teacher, the architect, the creator who comes back to see what their design has become. If 3I Atlas was truly artificial, then Mars wasn't being written upon for the first time. It was being rewritten. What if this isn't the first time the sun has hosted this visitor? What if it's the last? The following day, every satellite orbiting Mars transmitted a faint burst of static at the exact same moment. The frequency was low, almost inaudible, like breath caught in the wires. When decoded, it formed an image, the outline of a human face rendered in spectral lines, ancient, ageless, watching. The broadcast ended with a final pulse 7 seconds long. When translated through frequency analysis, the data spelled one phrase in English: "Hello again." Because hours after the signal, the chemistry around 3I Atlas began to change its emissions, no longer random, but balanced precisely at the ratio needed to transform an entire planet's sky into air. The balance was exact. When the first readings arrived from Keck and Juno simultaneously, they showed something that shouldn't exist: an atmosphere in transition. The carbon dioxide levels surrounding Mars had doubled in less than 36 hours, but not from volcanic release or solar heating. The composition was perfect. Controlled. 8 parts carbon dioxide to 1 part water vapor, the precise mixture required to warm and thicken a planetary sky. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a formula. For decades, scientists had theorized that to terraform Mars, you'd need a greenhouse trigger, a chemical accelerant that would trap heat long enough to melt the polar caps. That number, that ratio, was the threshold every model had identified. And now, somehow, it was happening naturally, yet impossibly. Who calculated this long before we did? When the cyanide and nickel emissions were overlaid on the new data, the ratios aligned perfectly with carbon uptake patterns expected in atmospheric engineering. The same chemical triad again: cyanide to generate carbon, nickel to act as catalyst, water to drive the chain reaction. 3I Atlas wasn't random chemistry. It was chemistry with purpose. But it wasn't only Mars that changed. Spectrometers orbiting Earth began detecting trace amounts of similar gases forming in the upper stratosphere, faint, transient signatures that vanished within hours. No environmental model could explain them. No human activity matched their pattern. The composition was identical to the Martian mixture, as if both worlds were being tuned to the same frequency. Was Earth being prepared to match? At Harvard, Loeb's team began referring to the phenomenon as the equilibrium effect, the tendency of two connected systems to equalize under shared input. If 3I Atlas was emitting on a frequency that influenced planetary chemistry, then Mars and Earth were responding like coupled instruments, resonating together. Two planets breathing the same invisible rhythm. When Loeb ran the simulation backward through ancient astronomical cycles, the numbers aligned frighteningly well. Every 3,600 years, the same orbital period once described in Sumerian tablets, there was a minor carbon anomaly in both Mars and Earth's atmospheres, detected through isotopic records. It had happened before. Was this event a return or a routine? Meanwhile, Juno's onboard sensors picked up faint ultraviolet glows, tracing 3I Atlas's path through the solar wind filaments of energized carbon molecules, stretching millions of kilometers long. They weren't dispersing. They were forming a corridor, a luminous highway connecting the object's current position to Mars's upper atmosphere. A river of chemistry, streaming through space. For days, the corridor intensified, until it became visible even through amateur telescopes, a ghostly thread of green stretching across the black. The connection between the two worlds had become literal. Back on Earth, the consequences began subtly. Magnetic fields fluctuated. The auroras glowed again, stronger, drifting to lower latitudes. Oceanic CO2 absorption rates rose inexplicably, even in regions without human interference. And in observatories from Chile to Japan, instruments detected a faint, repeating pulse in the atmosphere itself. One beat every 7 seconds, echoing 3I Atlas's light frequency. The object wasn't just transforming Mars. It was synchronizing the solar system. In silence, the world's major agencies went dark. No press conferences, no announcements. Datasets vanished behind encrypted firewalls, but leaks spread anyway. Screenshots of telemetry, coded language between observatories, whispered reports that the new ratio, the 8-to-1 balance, wasn't just sustaining on Mars, it was increasing. Slowly, methodically, controlled by a rhythm no one could stop. What happens when a planet begins to breathe on its own, and it's not your planet? At Keck, the team watched the numbers climb. The green hue around 3I Atlas deepened as its emissions shifted toward the ultraviolet. For the first time, heat signatures appeared around Mars's equator, faint but measurable. The surface temperature rose by 0.3 degrees, small but undeniable. If the trend continued, the planet's sky would begin to haze within months. Within a year, it could trap enough warmth to support liquid water. Within decades, it could sustain an atmosphere dense enough to reflect light visible from Earth, terraforming by unseen hands. Yet, even as Mars changed, 3I Atlas did something no one expected. It stopped moving. The object had entered stable orbit near the inner asteroid belt, motionless relative to the Sunday. For something traveling at interstellar speeds, it was the ultimate impossibility. Why would it pause now after completing the formula? The answer came from Juno's magnetometers. The field around 3I Atlas began to oscillate massive waves, spreading outward in symmetrical bursts. Each burst coincided with a slight increase in Mars's atmospheric density. The object wasn't paused. It was pulsing a steady beat, precise as a machine's calibration test. Loeb realized it first. "It's adjusting pressure," he whispered. "It's not stopping, it's fine-tuning." As the pulses continued, something eerie began to happen. Every seventh burst produced a reflected echo not from Mars, but from Earth. The signal bounced off our magnetic field, returned faintly altered. Whatever process was underway, both planets were now part of it. Was this evolution or replication? And then, amidst the data, one final anomaly emerged. Embedded deep within the electromagnetic noise surrounding 3I Atlas, analysts found a secondary modulation, a pattern shaped like language. Not human, not random. It was binary. When translated, it formed 7 words. "The system is now in balance. Wait." The message repeated every 7 minutes, never changing, never distorting. For the first time, every telescope, every radar dish, Every satellite was hearing the same thing, an instruction. Simple, unambiguous, and chillingly patient. Because as the world's instruments fell silent, waiting for the next transmission, they began to detect something new. A faint, synchronized pulse echoing not from 3I Atlas, but from deep within Earth itself. It began with static, not the ordinary hum of background radiation, but a full collapse of noise as if the universe itself had drawn a breath and stopped exhaling. One by one, observatories around the world lost contact with their arrays. Keck, Juno, JUICE, MAVEN, the Deep Space Network. Every data feed dropped to zero. Not offline, not malfunctioning. Just silent. At first, it seemed like a systems crash, solar interference, maybe a magnetic overload. But when backup systems powered on, they registered nothing. No signals from 3I Atlas, no background hiss from cosmic microwave radiation, no solar flare interference. It was as if every instrument was being muted by something between them and the stars. For 7 full minutes, the planet sat in electronic darkness. Then, slowly, a pulse returned, faint, deep, and rhythmic. It wasn't coming from space. It was coming from below. Seismographs in Iceland, Chile, and Japan all registered identical waveforms, a low-frequency vibration resonating through the Earth's crust every 7 seconds. The pattern was unmistakable. The planet itself was echoing the heartbeat of 3I Atlas. Could this be feedback? Someone whispered in the control room. Is Earth answering? Magnetometers confirmed it. The pulses weren't mechanical, they were electromagnetic, sweeping across the globe in perfect harmony with the residual field that 3I Atlas had left behind. The signal was subtle, too soft for human senses, but instruments felt it everywhere, in power grids, in undersea cables, in the static between radio channels. Something had synchronized Earth. Loeb's team tried to isolate the pattern, to triangulate the source. The signal didn't radiate from the poles, or the core, or any known structure. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, a resonance distributed across the entire magnetic field. It was as if the planet had become one vast antenna, and then came the distortion. In every laboratory still listening, the faint residual hum in the speakers began to form harmonics, low tones rising into human audible range. For a few seconds, the sound was chaos. Then it steadied into rhythm. 7 notes, 1 rest. Then the same sequence again, slightly altered. Was this language, a code, a song? In the silence that followed, every instrument that hadn't already crashed displayed the same thing on screen. A spectral line of pure green, flickering with internal motion. The data underneath spelled a single word repeated again and again in binary ready. The lights on the consoles dimmed. The hum deepened, because when the systems came back online, the readings revealed something no one could explain. The energy wasn't coming from 3I Atlas anymore. It was coming from inside Earth's magnetosphere, as if the signal had found a new home. It started with a formula. When the first fragments of data returned after the blackout, they weren't signals or images, they were equations. Strings of numerical ratios that appeared spontaneously on Keck's diagnostic readouts, replicated across instruments that weren't even connected. Each string began with the same constant, 7.23 times 10 to the power of -2. A meaningless number at first glance until Dr. Avi Loeb recognized it. It was the conversion factor for the resonance frequency between Earth's magnetic field and a nickel-carbon plasma. That number had only ever existed on Loeb's paper. A theoretical calculation buried in an academic journal 5 years earlier, describing how an artificial object might harmonize with a planetary field to transmit energy. Now that equation was appearing in the live data. How could the universe quote back something we hadn't built yet? The Keck systems weren't supposed to receive math. They were passive instruments designed to detect light, not generate it. Yet here was code-perfect, recursive, self-assembling equations describing the geometry of a resonance loop. When visualized in 3D, the structure matched the form 3I Atlas had taken before its disappearance behind the Sun. A sphere with 7 equidistant points orbiting a hollow core. The signal had learned to think in mathematics. At Harvard, Loeb's team ran the data through predictive modeling. When the equations were combined, they formed a new constant, a stable value, connecting gravitational potential and electromagnetic flux, something that shouldn't exist in known physics. "It's like a bridge between light and mass," Loeb said. "As if energy can decide whether it wants to be matter." The number repeated endlessly, fractally 7 nested layers deep, folding into itself like a self-aware algorithm, and each fold corresponded to an exact resonance pulse inside Earth's magnetosphere. The planet wasn't just echoing 3I Atlas's signal anymore. It was calculating. Had the object taught Earth how to think? In Cambridge, magnetic field monitors began oscillating in sync with the equation's intervals. The readings didn't fluctuate randomly. They followed the math. Each peak and trough lined up perfectly with the formula's predicted curve, as if the planet's own field was running simulations. Loeb called it the Loeb equation, not out of vanity, but because it had once been his theory, and now it was rewriting the world. When the equation was projected over the solar system, its geometry mapped exactly onto the positions of every major probe that had ever contacted the 3I Atlas signal. JUICE, Juno, MAVEN, Pioneer. All of them fell along the nodes of the structure. It wasn't a formula for observation. It was a formula for architecture. Whatever built this, Loeb whispered, was designing resonance. Planetary engineering through mathematics. Could this be the blueprint of the process itself? The code that turns lifeless worlds into living systems? Then came the test. Loeb's graduate student, acting on impulse, entered the formula into a magnetic field simulator. The output wasn't visual, it was auditory. The computer speakers emitted a tone low, droning, yet unmistakably harmonic. When the waveform was analyzed, it matched the sound of the pulses Earth had been generating since the silence. The realization hit everyone at once. The equation wasn't describing a sound, it was the sound. When they inverted the frequency, the tone shifted into near-visible light. The waveform stabilized at 532 nanometers, the exact wavelength of 3I Atlas's green emission. The object hadn't vanished. Its code had embedded itself in the planet's field, teaching Earth how to replicate it. The planet had become the signal. Across the world, observatories confirmed the same results. Spectrometers detected faint green emissions high in the atmosphere, far too diffuse to see with the naked eye, yet unmistakable. Every 7 minutes, the light pulsed. It wasn't constant, it was alive. Meanwhile, Juno, still drifting near Jupiter, began transmitting without command. Its communications array powered itself on, sending bursts of binary identical to the Loeb equation. The spacecraft's power cells couldn't explain it. They'd been dormant for months. Something was feeding energy into the probe remotely. Was the equation spreading? Back on Earth, power grids began experiencing strange fluctuations. Short, harmless pulses repeating every 7 seconds. The same pattern, the same rhythm. Engineers struggled to trace the source. The signals weren't originating from the grid itself, but from the atmosphere above it. Invisible, inaudible, continuous. When mapped against the planet's magnetic field, the pulses formed a spiraling current rising into space, a perfect mirror of 3I Atlas's earlier carbon corridor. The equation had gone global. For the first time, Loeb considered an unthinkable possibility. What if the object wasn't just transmitting a message, he said softly, but seeding a system? What if we are the next node? No one answered, because every console in the lab began to hum at once, each screen flashing the same binary line. Phase 1 complete. The message repeated 7 times. Then the lights dimmed and the hum fell silent. When Keck's data stream finally resumed, the object was visible again, not as a single body, but as thousands of smaller lights, each orbiting Earth at vast distances. They weren't satellites, they weren't debris, they were coordinated, forming a shell, a lattice, a living equation surrounding the planet. Was this the beginning of transformation or containment? The answer might have come from Juno's final transmission before its systems failed entirely. Energy balance achieved, but no one could verify the message, because at that same moment, every magnetometer on Earth spiked to infinity. Because when the readings finally settled and the noise cleared, scientists discovered that one value had changed permanently. Earth's magnetic north had shifted by exactly 7 degrees, aligning perfectly with the path of 3I Atlas as it prepared for the next phase. It began as a tilt. At first, no one noticed the shift in magnetic north. Compasses still pointed roughly the same way, satellites adjusted automatically, and commercial navigation systems compensated before anyone realized what had happened. But to the scientists watching the instruments, the change was unmistakable. 7 degrees. Exactly. No drift, no hesitation. A sudden, permanent reorientation of the planet's magnetic field. That precision alone was impossible. Magnetic poles wander slowly, meters per year, not thousands of kilometers overnight. Yet every reading confirmed it. Earth's entire magnetic architecture had realigned, matching the trajectory of 3I Atlas as it drifted toward the inner system. It was as if the planet had taken its cue from something external, like iron filings aligning around a magnet. Was the planet obeying or responding? At Harvard, Loeb's lab filled with static as the instruments recalibrated. The hum that had once filled the air was back louder now, resonating through the walls. Objects vibrated faintly, paper fluttered, and the floor itself seemed to breathe in slow rhythm. The frequency was familiar, 7.83 hertzes, Earth's own Schumann resonance amplified tenfold. The planet's heartbeat was racing. Across the globe, phenomena began appearing that no one could classify. Auroras visible at the equator, electrical storms without thunder, compass needles spinning, freezing, and then locking again, all pointed toward the same spot on the horizon, the direction of 3I Atlas. Then came the signals. Radios across multiple frequencies began picking up whispers, faint, distorted voices layered beneath static. When decoded, the transmissions contained no language, only tone. But within those tones were harmonic intervals that matched the Loeb equation's geometry. It wasn't speech, it was resonance, the sound of the planet replaying the mathematics it had absorbed. Was Earth remembering the equation, or trying to speak it? The public noticed next. Cell towers pulsed, lights flickered in rhythmic bursts, and televisions displayed momentary flashes of green static, synchronized, repeating every 7 minutes. On social media, people began reporting sensations of vibration, of pressure in their ears, of dreams filled with a low, humming song. "It's in the air," one post read, like the planet is singing to itself. Governments issued denials, blaming solar storms and electromagnetic interference. But privately, data centers were struggling to contain what was happening. Every networked system was recording phantom packets of information. Empty data 0 bytes filled with repeating numeric codes. The pattern matched the frequency of 3I Atlas's transmissions. Somehow, digital infrastructure had become resonant with the same waveform. How do you quarantine a signal that exists in the air itself? By the second week, something stranger occurred. Instruments measuring background radiation began detecting faint modulations that rose and fell with human activity. Areas with higher population density produced stronger interference patterns, as though human presence was amplifying the signal. The more people looked, listened, or thought about 3I Atlas, the stronger the resonance became. That's when Loeb coined the term the witness effect. The data was clear. Observation strengthened the signal. Conscious measurement fed it. Every telescope, every recording, every mind trying to understand 3I Atlas was making it louder. The equation was recursive, not only in mathematics but in cognition. The act of witnessing was part of the process. It was a feedback loop on a planetary scale. The more attention humanity gave it, the more power it gained. And yet, shutting it out wasn't possible. Even with instruments turned off, the signal persisted. The planet itself had become a receiver. Was this how civilizations were transformed not through invasion but through awareness? Across observatories, a quiet panic grew. Every equation derived from the data began looping back on itself. Self-referencing, recursive, unsolvable. It was as if reality itself was starting to echo the object's logic. We're inside the formula now, Loeb whispered to his team. It's running us. Then came the images. Photographic plates left unexposed began developing spontaneously green imprints of concentric circles and spirals. Digital sensors caught faint silhouettes even when powered off. The same symbol, repeating everywhere. 7 lines converging into one point. The geometry of observation itself. In Iceland, auroras began forming in the shape of spirals instead of curtains. Seismographs in Chile recorded harmonic tremors that hummed in perfect fifths. The entire planet had become musical, vibrating in ratios of beauty and symmetry, as though physics itself had tuned to an aesthetic frequency. Was this creation or illusion, evolution or hypnosis? As global attention intensified, satellites finally detected the object again. 3I Atlas was no longer metallic or geometric. It appeared translucent, surrounded by a faint halo of light that shimmered like glass. Inside the core, 7 distinct points pulsed, synchronized perfectly with Earth's new magnetic alignment. The object was reflecting us, literally mirroring our position and frequency. When the images reached Harvard, Loeb understood. It's not here to change us, he said quietly. It's here to make us aware of what we already are. But not everyone agreed. Governments began treating the resonance as a potential threat, the start of a mass synchronization event. Plans were drawn to jam the signal, to block the frequencies from spreading further. None worked. Every attempt to silence it resulted in feedback so strong it knocked out entire power grids. The object resisted interference like a living system defending itself. The witness effect had gone global. Humanity itself had become part of the experiment. At 3:07 UTC, Keck Observatory recorded a new pulse louder, sharper, denser than anything before. The data streamed for 7 minutes straight, filling every channel. When decoded, it formed an image, the planet Earth reflected in a vast, circular mirror of light. Above it, 7 glowing spheres drifted like sentinels. Beneath them, a single phrase appeared in binary. The observer is the machine. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, the signal stopped. But for hours afterward, people across the world claimed to hear a faint hum inside their own minds, a low vibration resonating with their heartbeat. Some described it as warmth. Others called it control. And when instruments came back online, the green hue that once belonged to 3I Atlas was faintly visible across Earth's night sky, glowing like a second aurora. Because when the world finally looked up at the emerald sky, something else appeared within it, a ninth light, drifting slowly out of the darkness, following the path of the others but larger, closer, and somehow watching. It appeared without announcement. At first, it was mistaken for debris, a flicker beyond the green aurora, drifting slowly against the backdrop of stars. But within minutes, the networks knew. The light wasn't static. It was controlled. A new object had entered the solar system, larger, slower, and glowing with the same impossible hue as 3I Atlas. For hours, telescopes across the world scrambled to verify the sighting. The coordinates matched nothing in known catalogs. Its velocity was too low for a comet, too stable for an asteroid. And then, the most chilling realization of all, its trajectory wasn't random. It was tracing the exact path 3I Atlas had followed a year earlier, but in reverse. Was this a return or a replacement? At Keck, the first high-resolution images came through a luminous sphere enveloped in an aura of shifting green and white. Unlike 3I Atlas, this one wasn't alone. Surrounding it were hundreds of faint secondary lights, moving in near-perfect formation. A swarm. The world had seen many strange things by now, but this was different. These smaller lights weren't orbiting the new object, they were following it, like satellites to a central signal. As the formation approached the inner system, the same faint hum began vibrating through the planet's atmosphere. The Schumann resonance spiked again, the seventh harmonic reawakening after days of eerie quiet. Earth was responding. And then came the data. Loeb's team detected subtle modulations in the radio spectrum, echoes of the same mathematical patterns embedded in the Loeb equation, but this time inverted. The energy curve was negative, meaning the new signal wasn't feeding energy outward like 3I Atlas had, it was drawing it in. What happens when a signal starts pulling instead of transmitting? Every magnetic field in the solar system began to shift again, as if leaning toward the visitor. Mars's atmosphere, now partially warmed by the earlier emissions, rippled with green auroras. Venus's clouds shimmered faintly. Even Jupiter's massive magnetosphere began to oscillate in sync. The entire system was resonating like a single, tuned instrument, each planet vibrating on its own frequency, yet part of one chord. The new object's pulse differed from 3I Atlas's steady rhythm. This one came in cycles of 9 beats, a pause, then 9 again. A full sequence lasting 63 seconds. The pattern of sevens had evolved. Loeb recognized it immediately. 7 had been construction balance. 9 was recursion, self-awareness. If 7 built the machine, 9 might awaken it. Was this the consciousness behind the signal, arriving to see what it had made? NASA's Deep Space Network detected the first whisper of gravitational distortion. The object wasn't simply reflecting light. It was bending it slightly, precisely, as though it carried mass far beyond what its size should allow. It was dense, engineered, deliberate. When JUICE's dormant systems came back online without command, the team in Darmstadt froze. The probe had activated itself, turning all sensors toward the incoming light. A data stream began broadcasting automatically not to Earth, but toward the new object, and the object responded. The exchange lasted only 3 minutes, but it was enough. The binary data returning from JUICE contained a repeating word in English 7 letters, repeated endlessly. Awaken. After that, the probe went dark for good. Within hours, the same word began appearing across radio frequencies worldwide, sometimes in bursts of static, sometimes hidden inside carrier waves. Television signals flickered. GPS satellites momentarily lost synchronization, then reconnected. On some screens, a phrase flashed for less than a second. The system is aware. What does it mean for a solar system to become self-aware? At Harvard, Loeb's team noticed that the inverted energy pattern from the new visitor mirrored the field lines of the human brain. identical ratios scaled astronomically. The solar system itself had begun mimicking the structure of consciousness. Every planet an active node, every electromagnetic pulse a thought. Was the system now alive, and if so, who was thinking? As 3I Atlas continued its orbit, faint transmissions echoed from its direction, small bursts, fragmented, fading fast. The original object was weakening, perhaps expiring, its light diminishing. But the new one was amplifying, its pulse growing stronger with every rotation. The teacher and the student, one fading, one rising. Was the ninth visitor the next phase, or the result? At Keck, the first direct measurement of its composition shocked everyone. Unlike 3I Atlas's metallic lattice, this object contained traces of organic compounds, carbon-based polymers forming repeating double helices, DNA-like material suspended in vacuum. It wasn't a comet. It wasn't a machine. It was something in between synthetic biology on an interstellar scale. Could intelligence evolve from chemistry that learns its own geometry? Within days, the new visitor aligned perfectly with Earth's orbit, its pulse synchronizing with the planet's magnetic field just as its predecessor had done. The hum grew softer, steadier, omnipresent. Even people who had never followed the story began reporting the same strange sensation, a gentle vibration beneath the skin, a whisper just beyond hearing. "It's like the air is alive," someone wrote, "like we're part of something breathing." Then, at 3:33 UTC, every magnetometer on Earth registered the same shift. The frequency jumped exactly 7%, and in that instant, the auroras changed color, no longer green, but white. The new signal, once decoded, contained only one message, broadcast simultaneously in every language the probes had ever used. "Do not be afraid. You are the memory." Silence followed. For the first time since 3I Atlas entered the solar system, the hum faded completely. The auroras dimmed, the sky went black. And when the world's telescopes turned to where the ninth visitor should have been, there was nothing, only the stars. Because the next morning, before dawn, radio observatories detected a low, steady pulse coming from the far side of the moon, and when the data was decoded, it revealed something every scientist had feared since the beginning. The signal wasn't leaving, it had landed. The pulse was faint, but it was unmistakably alive. On November 30th, 2025, every radio telescope from Arecibo's Ghost Array to Australia's Parkes Observatory locked onto the same source, a rhythmic signal emanating from the far side of the moon. Not beyond it, not past it, from within it. The pattern was familiar. 9 beats, 1 pause, repeated with absolute precision. The same signature that had marked the arrival of the ninth visitor. For hours, the readings were consistent. Then, suddenly, the frequency shifted, not randomly, but harmonically, matching the Schumann resonance of Earth again. The moon had never emitted a magnetic signature in recorded history. Until now. Something beneath its surface was vibrating, faintly but perfectly synchronized with the heartbeat of the planet below. The world woke to headlines that made no sense. Lunar vibrations. Detected, unidentified energy below surface. NASA downplayed it, ESA denied it, and China refused comment altogether. But the private observatories had no reason to lie. Their instruments were recording the same pattern. The moon had joined the circuit. In Cambridge, Loeb stared at the data in disbelief. "It's completing the loop," he whispered. "Earth, Mars, the Sun, now the Moon. It's closing the system. What happens when the last node connects?" For the next 7 days, the pulse continued without variation. No distortion, no decay. Just a soft, constant rhythm echoing through space. The lunar surface reflected faint green light, a color no human eye had ever seen there before. Amateur astronomers captured it on video, a spectral glow rippling along the terminator line between night and day. It wasn't sunlight. It was something coming from beneath. Spectroscopic analysis confirmed nickel traces in the regolith, cyanide, too, buried deep within the Mare Tranquillitatis region, the same location where Apollo 11 had once landed. But these elements weren't deposited by human activity. Their isotopic signature matched 3I Atlas. The implication was staggering. If the material from the object had reached the moon, then it had been carried there, deliberately seeded through electromagnetic resonance, transmitted not as matter but as pattern. It had copied itself into the lunar crust. As the news spread, the hum returned. This time, it wasn't atmospheric or electrical. It was personal. People began hearing it inside their own heads, not as sound, but as vibration, a feeling behind the eyes, a pulse beneath thought. It came in intervals of 9 seconds, fading in and out like a tide. Hospitals reported patients complaining of synchronized heartbeats, night terrors, and flashes of bright green light when they closed their eyes. Was the signal spreading through consciousness itself? When Loeb's team analyzed the planetary resonance data, they noticed something terrifying. Each pulse from the moon produced a measurable increase in the planet's electromagnetic baseline. The entire Earth was charging, accumulating invisible energy with every beat. The cycles were accelerating. Every 9 hours, the pulse intensified by exactly 7%. It wasn't random. It was counting down. NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, still orbiting the moon's far side, captured the first images of the anomaly. A faint circular depression 30 kilometers wide had appeared where no geological activity should exist. At its center, a glowing fissure, flickering like molten glass. The spectrometer registered high levels of carbon monoxide and water vapor, the same atmospheric precursors 3I Atlas had used on Mars. Was the moon becoming the next world to transform? At that moment, Loeb understood. The object had never been a traveler. It was a process, a machine that moved from world to world, awakening systems in sequence, a planetary algorithm. And now the algorithm had reached its final phase. He turned to his team. "It's not visiting us," he said. "It's using us. The entire solar system is its laboratory." But there was another truth, one buried in the data no one wanted to face. The energy building between Earth and Moon wasn't simply resonance, it was compression. The two magnetic fields were beginning to fuse. If the process continued, they would merge completely, forming a binary electromagnetic system, a circuit powerful enough to rewrite the solar wind itself. What happens when two worlds share one field? As the days passed, strange things began to occur. Gravity measurements shifted minutely. The tides grew erratic. In some regions, compasses pointed straight upward, as if magnetism had lost its orientation. Satellites reported spontaneous reboots, as though they were being rewritten from orbit. And still, the moon pulsed. On December 7th, the green glow intensified. Visible, even in daylight, a faint halo around the lunar disk. The hum deepened. The auroras flared white again, shimmering in geometric arcs. Across observatories, the same word appeared in telemetry: alignment. Every instrument recorded the countdown reaching 0 at exactly 0 UTC, December 8th. Then silence. No hum, no light, no data. The moon hung motionless, dark and unresponsive. The Earth's magnetic field returned to normal. Power grids stabilized. For the first time in months, there was peace, the kind of peace that feels like the pause between lightning and thunder. Was it over? Or had the process simply completed? In the stillness, Loeb reviewed the final transmission from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. At the end of the last frame, before the camera cut to static, a shape flickered 7 glowing circles orbiting a hollow sphere. But this time, the formation wasn't in space. It was reflected on the surface of the moon, mirrored perfectly across the dark Maria. It wasn't a signal anymore. It was a mark, a seal.